From the banks of Dewey Lake, it's the Dewey Pod Monster.
It's the new Horrorween for 2024.
All right, welcome back. My name is John, and this is the Dewey Pod Monster podcast. This is the original podcast about consumption, and we are proud members of the You Run Podcast Network. You can find all of our previous shows, as well as all the other great shows at yourunpodcast.com. And with me this week is the host of the Dewey Pod Monster podcast, and his name is Sean. And Sean, how are you doing this evening?
John, I drove 1,100 miles this weekend, and boy, are my arms tired.
That makes more sense if you flew, but okay. Okay, it's just your driving arm that's tired.
My jack and arms. My jack and arms tired, John.
You saved it. So aside from jacking off for 1,100 miles, what have you been watching this week, Sean?
Well, I did get not much of a chance to watch a whole lot, and I'll talk about it second, and it relates to the 1,100 miles. So I talked a couple weeks ago about Found Footage Fest on YouTube and the Found Footage Festival that the dudes from Found Footage Fest, you know how better to refer to them as, they put a movie out. So it's called Chop and Steal, and it is a documentary basically about these two guys, the Found Footage Fest guys, and their touring show, and what they would do when they're going around the country to show found footage festival stuff is that they would get booked on local morning shows, you know, like local news broadcasts or whatever for morning news, and they'd get asked the same questions over and over again. So what they started doing was posing as other people. So they would pose as chefs or whatever, and they would just make some disgusting recipes or whatever, and you can find some of their clips on their YouTube channel. But they ended up touring these kind of small local markets, and they would advertise themselves as being these touring strongmen. So as I mentioned, again, multiple episodes back, those people that would like blow up hot water bottles or try to rip the phone book in half or lay on beds of nails and shit like that. But they would do these super...
Man shit.
Yeah, man shit. They would do these really just ludicrous strongmen, like really just weak ass strongman shit. Like they would do these exercises where they'd be bench pressing each other and stuff. Anyways, they did it on this channel in Wisconsin that was owned by Gray Television, and Gray Television is a network that owns like 100 different local television stations, and they actually took them to court. So they got for fraud, basically posing as people that they weren't.
Pronounced fraud.
Yeah, Freud. So they got sued for Freud, and this documentary kind of covers not only the act and stuff about Found Footage Fest, but also about the court case and how Found Footage Fest went from being these two guys to being this bigger thing. So it's kind of like a documentary, not only about Found Footage Fest. So if you're interested in Found Footage Fest, it's good to watch to kind of get background on them. It's on Tubi, a few other things like that. But it was an interesting look into them basically going into big time debt from getting sued over this. I think they settled out of court for, I want to say like $100,000 or something like that for fooling this television station. Basically, the television station didn't do their due diligence and investigate these guys at all. They had stuff that were total obvious clues that they weren't who they were saying they were. But what it did is it forayed them into being on America's Got Talent as this act, because of the AGT producers saw them do this and they heard about all this stuff. So they wanted to have them on the show, and they interview Howie Mandel, because Howie Mandel's a judge on AGT. I don't know if you've ever watched AGT or knew that, but
no, I knew he was a judge, but
Howie Mandel, I guess, is a huge fan of their stuff because it's just kind
like
of
a giant germaphobe too, or something.
He is,
like that.
yeah.
Like famously a germaphobe.
Fun fact about Howie Mandel: when he had his talk show, Purell knew how much of a germaphobe he was, so they supplied him with like the first real commercially available hand sanitizer, and he used it so much that he killed all the bacteria on his hands, and he basically started developing like a hardcore case of warts, because warts there was no bacteria to fight them off. Fun fact about Howie Mandel. Didn't know that you were going to hear that today.
I didn't even know that he had a talk show.
It was a daytime talk show. I think it was after Deal or No Deal, but I'm not quite sure the timeline.
I remember Bobby's World, and I remember Germs, and that he's on. You know, I wouldn't have remembered that.
I think.
Okay, I would not have remembered that it's America's Got Talent, but I knew he had one of those like
variety show,
call and vote variety show things or whatever.
Yeah, and other than that,
there's like 5 of those now.
I think it's kind of slowed down recently. I think it's AGT might be the only one standing still. Yeah, American Idol.
What about the one with Snoop Dogg and Reba and Gwen Stefani?
Oh, The Voice,
the country
there
guy.
You go.
Yeah,
to go on top of the 1,100-mile thing, I went to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, went to Dollywood, the home of the amusement park for Dolly Parton. That's what I did.
How were her boobs?
I mean, they're okay, I guess.
Oh, that's good to know.
Dollywood is like, I expected it to be, and I hope, I'm going to try and say this as least offensively as possible. I thought that it would be a lot of toothless hillbillies with their bellies hanging out of their shirts and, out the bottom of their shirts and stuff. I don't know why. I've never been to Pigeon Forge before. It was really nice. Like, they cram a shit ton of roller coasters in this pretty small plot of land, all things considered, basically nestled in the mountains, the Smoky Mountains. Got to see the Smoky Mountains for the first time in 30 some odd years. But the only thing I'll say two things. Number one, they need to widen the paths of that place, because I think that they've crammed so much in that the paths are kind of narrow. And we went on a Saturday evening and it was so packed that you couldn't, when we were trying to leave, you couldn't take full steps. Like, you're just basically shuffling because there are so many people going every direction, kind of like Disney, but even more people in a smaller area. And the other thing is the rides. So all these amusement parks, I know you're not really an amusement park guy, but all these places have some kind of fast pass or lightning lane or whatever, where you pay and you get to have access to rides ahead of everyone else. They have a thing at Dollywood called Time Saver. And the Time Saver lines were almost as long as the regular lines. That's how many people had Time Saver passes. And the other thing is, a lot of these coasters, they have 13 or 14 coasters, something like that. Don't quote me on that. But they have a lot of coasters, and they only have 2 sets of cars on max. So you go to someplace like Cedar Point or Disney, and you get on, and they have 3 or 4 sets of these different cars that they run continuously, right? So as soon as you get on your ride, there's people behind you waiting to get off, and sometimes 2 rows of people waiting to get off. And this one, just a lot of the rides that we were on had 1 set of cars. So you would get on, and the people that got on ahead of you were the people that were getting off so you could get on. So it just was very inefficient. And there was one they had on the app. It said it would be a 45-minute wait. We waited 2 hours, and that just killed my entire want to be there anymore. We got on this ride. It was a cool ride, but it wasn't 2 hours wait worth. And I just said to my wife and kids, I'm like, I am ready to go. It's 6 o'clock now. We've been here since 10. I am good. We can leave now. We ended up staying a little longer, but.
Well, you just answered my question. My question is going to be, are their hours 9 to 5, but apparently they're open till 6 at least.
I think they were open till 9. Actually 10 that night, Saturday.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, it was.
How many Dolly Parton puns did you see wandering around there?
I didn't see any. There were no impersonators. There were.
That's really disappointing.
The only thing that they have a lot of Dolly merchandise,
Sure.
shirts and magnets and stickers. And of course, everything says Dollywood on it and doesn't necessarily have her likeness on it. But
that's disappointing.
They have the Dolly Parton experience, which takes you through. It's like a museum, a walk through exhibit that you see from her earliest career when she recorded a song when she was 8 or something. And then it talks about her parents and then her first actual television appearance and then her career up through today. And that was that was one thing. And the other thing was the clothes, the fashion, the styles and her wigs and everything and rhinestones and everything that she's worn throughout her career and who designed these things, and kind of talked about her more glamorous thing. I think one of the big quotes, and I'm going to totally butcher this, is it takes a lot of money to look this cheap. That's accredited to Dolly Parton. And yeah, I mean, her outfits are really amazing. And it was cool. And I kind of expected to see more of that. Like you're saying, more, just people walking through the main street or whatever, dressed up like Dolly Parton and, all these impersonators. But it was actually pretty, I don't know why I'm surprised. I thought it was kind of classy.
I would never call myself a Dolly Parton fan, but she's definitely on the short list of people that it's hard to have anything really against her, as far as I know.
I mean, she's donated 245 million books to kids.
I didn't know that either. But I mean, again, just what I do know, it's I don't have to like her music to be yeah, she's fine.
Yeah, I mean, she's she's a extremely talented person.
Absolutely.
She plays 20 instruments or something like that.
Really?
And in her shows, she will play a guitar and put the guitar down and play a saxophone and then put the saxophone down and sing.
It's your own fucking variety show right there.
Yeah. Some of the 20 things might be key based, maybe a piano and a keyboard and a dulcimer or whatever. And, I don't even know what the fuck a dulcimer is.
If you had told me that she played one instrument, that would be one more instrument than I know how to play. So she's still ahead of me.
Yeah, so it was pretty cool. I don't know if I'll need to ever go back this lifetime, but it was enjoyable while I was there for the most part, except for the inefficiencies. That's me. I notice that shit. But other than that, it was pretty cool. I mean, it was good to get away for a short weekend or a long weekend, I guess, 3 days.
Well, that's good. Anything else you caught up on over the week or just those?
No, that's pretty much all I had time for.
Well, I'll only bring up a couple things that I watched. They were both new releases, so they're somewhat relevant, kind of the type of stuff that we talk about. One of them I'm sure we'll talk about at length later on down the year. But one movie that I kind of hope that I never have to watch again is the 2024 version of Salem's Lot that just came out on HBO, like maybe a week or two ago.
Yeah, recently.
Yeah. I always, it's been so long since I watched the original. All I really remember is like bald dude with fucked looking teeth and like a lot of, this. And for those who can't see me, I'm just kind of waving my hands over my head right now. Yeah, a lot of that. That's the majority of what I remember from it. And I'm not saying that's what the original was. It's been so long since I've seen it. But I don't remember I remember it being decent enough. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll give a updated version of this a try. And it's one of those movies. And are you planning to watch this? Like, can I give you my opinion on it quickly without it being a big deal?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I kind of feel like I want to watch it. And the only thing I really remember about Salem's Lot, the original, is that it was originally a TV movie and it seemed a lot scarier than it should have been for a TV movie. Yeah,
but that was kind of common at the time, wasn't it? Like,
yeah, probably.
It's a TV movie, but like, we don't really give a fuck. Anyway, with this one, the big takeaway I had from it, I'm not even going to get into the story because it's basically just a typical, haunting / vampire type story. But one, my favorite part of the movie is when it went from like creepy farmhouse looking, like, because I watched it on HBO with ads, and my favorite part was creepy farmhouse, like vampire scene, right into Pedro Pascal on the beach selling me a Corona. Blinking it like seamlessly went into that. I'm like, how the fuck did we get here? And when did Pedro Pascal show up? And I'm like, oh, this is an ad. So that was pretty cool. But the biggest problem I have with this movie is like horribly guilty of abusing CGI. Like, this movie has a lot of things that go like pretty well in it. It's a very modern feeling horror movie in that it's kind of slow and it's kind of trying to make you get like settled in, and then it pops out and does, shit to you. It's not anything like, it's not reinventing the wheel by any stretch, but the CG in this movie is so fucking bad to me that when I watched it, I'm like, all right, this is getting kind of creepy. This is getting kind of cool. And all of a sudden, here's Casper, the friendly vampire there with glowing eyes. I'm like, okay, that totally takes me out of it. And I have no idea what their budget is. Again, this is on HBO. I don't know if they originally were going to try to put this in theaters or if it was always intended to be on HBO. But what I do know is you can make vampires look like vampires relatively cheap in comparison to a lot of other creatures that are out there. And I think big picture blood is relatively cheap to make compared to a lot of other things out there. And they just totally like shat the bed on both of them to me. So for me, that was like anything else that the movie did good. And like I said, it does some, like, there's some good scenery shots. There's some good ideas behind it. It's pretty typical vampire story, but the visuals are just so bad that it just ruined everything else for me. Like, I got through it, but like maybe 45 minutes into it, I'm like, why am I still watching this bullshit? Maybe that's why I was happy to see Pedro Pascal show up with a beer, because I was like, you know what? You got the right idea, Pedro. I'm going to go grab a beer and finish this shit show.
I could use a beer.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you have any type of reverence for the original, I guess, give it a try. It's not, this movie won't hurt you, but
that's good.
I don't know who's going to watch this and be like, not feel like I said, it's one of those that really feels like it's so bad that it does take you out of everything else that's going on, which I feel like I want to say I've come a long way with CG. I know it's used a lot more than I want to admit. And there's a lot of times where it doesn't even bother me anymore. But when it does bother me, it sticks out like a sore fucking thumb. And it's not like when you're watching a movie from like the late 90s where CG was kind of in its infancy and you're like, yeah, well, grain of salt, this is 30 years old at this point. Like, that's what they had to work with. No, it's 2024. They could have made even if they did everything CG, this could have looked so much better. And it was disappointing on that.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, so hopefully no one asks us to do a full-on episode about that because I don't really want to watch it again. Unless I'm going to watch it with Pedro Pascal and a beer, then maybe I'll watch it again. Other than that, the other thing that I actually went to a theater and saw, because I don't trust any of you fuckers on the internet not to ruin this movie before it, has been out for more than -3 days, because I was seeing the spoilers before it even came out. I bought a ticket and went and saw Terrifier 3. And my initial thought, and again, I won't say anything that will really spoil this movie. My initial thought is I saw it on October, what's today? The 14th. So I saw it on October 12th. And this is very much so a Christmas movie. And yes, it's a horror movie, but it's a Christmas movie. And my prevailing thought through the whole movie and when I came out of the movie was this would have been so much more fun if this came out anytime between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Just the fact that it's a Christmas movie and it has a Terrifier level of mayhem and everything else with it. I would have had so much more fun with it just being in the Christmas mood and watching Santa art do Santa things in the right time frame. But being before Halloween, this is probably as much a me thing as anything, but I really fucking hate acknowledging Christmas before Halloween. You have 2 months that we've given you for this Halloween. Keep your fat Santa ass over there in November and December. Let's get through this holiday first. So that kind of, I guess it doesn't matter what I think because they still went to #1 in the box office and blah, blah, blah. But that part kind of sucks. I feel like they could have made more money if they had done it in December. Maybe they'll re-release it because I don't think it's going to be in theaters long.
And not to take away from it, but the return, the #1 box office kind of thing, I think it was like $11 million, seems...
I thought I heard 18.
Oh, really? Last I heard it was 11, so maybe it is 18. But that just, even 18 sounds, I haven't been keeping my finger on the pulse of the box office. That seems extremely low. Maybe it's since COVID, it's all been pretty low, right?
I don't know. For a movie that's not a Marvel movie or a comic book movie, and a movie that has, I think, a $2 million budget, I think is what they said, and is on limited screens, I feel like that's pretty... I think it's good when you compare it to what the overall, like when you think of the whole thing in a vacuum, and I guess we'll see how much money it makes altogether. It's obviously a huge success for, the franchise and Terrifier and arguably horror as a whole. But it also says to me, there wasn't really any real competition for it. And I know that Joker movie came out, which I've heard nothing but wonderful things about that.
He said facetiously.
Yeah. Outside of that, there's no other big movie. The only other movie that I know that came out this week is the Donald Trump movie, and I don't even know if that's playing any. I think that's got a more limited release than what Terrifier does by a pretty huge margin.
I was going to say, did that come out?
It came out the same day as Terrifier. They're basically the same character. But as far as the movie is concerned, like I said, I won't go into any plot or spoiler or any of that type of stuff. We are probably going to cover this at length before the end of the year, probably closer to Christmas where it belongs, because that's the goal or hope. I will say that this is a Terrifier movie. I personally don't feel that it necessarily shows you anything that you wouldn't expect from a Terrifier movie. You're not going to come out of it holy shit, I have a new opinion of this franchise. I think if you, Sean, who is Art's biggest supporter, your opinion will be unchanged. And for other people who are actually Art's biggest supporter, their opinion will be unchanged.
It's more of the same. Right.
For the most part. There's obviously, it's like any other sequel. You're going to see things in it that you'll say, I like this more than this, but I don't think they're not reinventing the wheel of the franchise. So take that for what it's worth.
Second verse, same as the first.
Third in this case. And I have other things when you get into the plot and the characters and stuff that I could, break down more, but now's not the time for that. What I did like about it, and I want to put this out there because we did a whole episode on that stupid Mickey Mouse movie, is they did tack a trailer on for Screamboat, which is, I guess, their version of the Mickey Mouse horror movie. And I can tell you from it's probably a minute-long trailer they had. I was infinitely more entertained by that minute-long trailer than the other Mickey Mouse movie. That doesn't mean that I want to go see it in a theater or anything like that, per se. But I will say that having only seen the trailer, I'm already sold that it's a better movie than the last Mickey Mouse horror movie that I watched.
It's a pretty low bar.
Well, they don't show you Mickey Mouse in full in this. They just allude to him as some kind of creature that's living in the hull of this ship. But they show his hand or he looks like a rat that's been going through a sewer for a long period of time. So really matted and gnarly looking fur wise. That's all you really see in some like, splats and stuff. But again, that alone, I'm like, this is better than a fat dude in a hockey mask or a fat dude in a Kevin Smith wearing a Mickey Mouse mask for 2 hours and not killing anyone. But yeah, all the other stuff I got this week that I watch can be brought up later. It's all rewatch stuff. So until then, let's take a quick break and we're going to come back and talk about this week's topic, which is Creepshow. Hey, this is John, and I am excited to tell you about another exciting podcast that you can find on the You Run Podcast Network. Do you like spooky stuff? Then check out the Paranormal Misfits podcast. This podcast features your favorite besties diving fearlessly into the paranormal, uncovering mysterious phenomena, unraveling mind-bending conspiracies, and sharing their thoughts on all things horror. Head over to yourunpodcast.com now and check out the Paranormal Misfits podcast, as well as all the other great shows on the You Run Podcast Network. All right, we are on to week 4 of Horrorween. This week for Horrorween, we are going to talk about the movie Creepshow, and this is the first Stephen King movie we've talked about other than me bitching about Salem's Lot 5 minutes ago, isn't it?
Twofer.
Yeah. So is this the first Stephen King movie we've talked about? I think it is.
Yeah, I think it might be.
Well, we picked a fun place to start as far as Stephen King stuff goes, because this is definitely outside the box for his normal oeuvre. Yeah, whatever. So as per usual, we're going to start with a third-party review, and our third-party review comes from Rotten Tomatoes, as they say. And this person says, whose name is Landon J, says, I only need 4 words to describe this movie. I'm picking this because he says he only needs 4 words to describe this movie, because he go ahead and use the counting game. I only need 4 words to describe this movie. Disgusting, boring, and not scary. 1 out of 5 stars. So with that 4-word review out of the way, Sean, what is Creepshow about?
All right, so for that, we go to IMDb and we type in the word Creepshow. We find the one from 1982 because that's the one we're talking about. And this has a 6.8 out of 10 out of 54,000 reviews. It's up to spot 2099 from some number. It's up 61 spots from a different number from some other time. And we go to the storyline of the plot. We go to the one that's on top, but I'm never quite sure if it's the storyline or the plot, but it says 5 grisly tales from a kid's comic book about a murdered father rising from his grave, a bizarre meteor, a vengeful husband, a mysterious crate's occupant, and a plague of cockroaches. And if we scroll down to the storyline, I guess that makes the top one the plot. This one is care of Todd A. Bobenrath. You can check him out at tab146 at psuvm.edu. And he says, 5 tales of terror are presented. The first deals with a demented old man returning from the grave to get the Father's Day cake his murdering daughter never gave him. The second is about a not-too-bright farmer discovering a meteor that turns everything into plant life. The third is about a vengeful husband burying his wife and her lover up to their necks on the beach. The fourth is about a creature that resides in a crate under the steps of a college. And the final story is about an ultra-rich businessman who gets his comeuppance from cockroaches.
So I think we'll get into this a lot more as we go along on this, because we're going to basically look at each story individually and then kind of go from there. So Sean, before we start breaking down each story, who's involved with this movie from a production standpoint?
Some people.
Good answer.
Thank you. This is directed by George Romero, written by Stephen King. So we got some pretty high, good. It's got a good pedigree, to put it that way.
It's got some real Pittsburgh stock going behind it, plus wherever the fuck Stephen King's from.
New England, I think.
Is he? That makes sense.
I think so.
I don't know. I'm not a big Stephen King fan, so that's right. I'll get yelled at for that eventually. So you mentioned that there's 5 stories in this. There's actually really a kind of 6, because there's a prologue that kind of wraps or bookends this. Let's start there. The prologue is basically how we get introed into the story and who's in the prologue. Why do we give a fuck about this?
It's got one of our favorites, Tom Atkins.
Damn right it does.
Tom Atkins plays the dad. He finds a horror comic in his kid's room and he gets all shitty about it and he throws it in the trash.
Yeah, well, threatened to kick the crap out of this kid.
And that's when the creep comes to visit the kid.
It is. And I kind of really like this prologue, and I like the creep because this set of stories is very much so based off like a serial comic book from the, I'm assuming 70s, maybe 60s at this point. But the concept is basically to try and make a comic book into a movie, but not in the way that we think of it now. So tell an anthology story and have them kind of piece together as if you're looking at a comic book. The creep that shows up is cool because it's kind of a mix of like a puppet and animation, which we see throughout the movie. Like it's, I guess you could kind of call it the binder that kind of ties each story together or lets you know you're transitioning from one story to the other. I don't know why, but maybe it's because he kind of looks like the Crimson Ghost from the Misfits cover, but I've always found the creep to be really intriguing and
creepy.
Yeah, the original poster with him or her, I guess it doesn't really matter if it's a he or her, but the original poster with the creep inside of the old school ticket window.
Yeah.
Hey, there's a poster of it up over there. Like I've always, over there as I point to what no one can see. I've always really liked that, the artwork for that, as far as the cover art and just how it's used to intertwine these stories.
Yeah, it's definitely got a creepy look to it. I think that on the poster, it looks more like, I mean, not that it matters, but I always got the impression that it was a female creep because it has like a shawl over its head and stuff, but it's always been
longer hair for sure.
Yeah. And it's always just, it stands out. Like walking down the video store aisles and seeing this cover of this movie, VHS or whatever, always stands out. And it's like, disturbing in a weird kind of way.
Well, that's, we've said it a million times. That's what made the video store horror aisle great, is you would find these movies like this that stood out just based off the box. Cause that's more often than not, we didn't have like, hey, I'm gonna get on YouTube on my phone and see if this trailer is interesting. That shit wasn't available. Like
I had to go to apple.com to look at those trailers.
That's right. You had to call the hotline and have them read it to you over the phone.
Why don't you just tell me the movie you want to see?
Yeah. So you mentioned the opening story. So we got Tom Atkins being kind of a shitty dad. This one kind of wraps up quick because we come back around to it near the end of it. So we won't touch on it too much until we get to the end. I think it's interesting seeing Tom Atkins look. This is 1982. So
sans mustache.
Yeah, that's why I was going with it. Like him without a mustache, it always throws me, at least at this age, Tom Atkins, throws me off for a minute.
Yeah, I think every other time I've ever seen him in a movie, he's had at least a mustache. So it's really weird.
Yeah. Even most of the stuff when he's older, he's got the mustache. And I'm trying to remember, did he have the mustache in the Fog? Because I'm not sure if he did or not.
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question.
That's the only one that's sticking out of my head if he did or didn't have it in there. Also haven't watched that in a while.
Yeah, same.
So after Tom Atkins beats the shit out of Billy, who I believe is Stephen King's kid, Joe King, I believe is who plays the kid in the movie. If only we had something some sort of database we could reference to confirm or deny that. Anyway, so he beats the shit out of a kid, takes his comic book, and then we're off to the first story, which is Father's Day, which is, I'm going to give you Cliff Notes versions and you can elaborate on them if you choose to. Basically, Father's Day is about a piece of shit dad who dies. His Jim Beam drinking daughter, if I remember right, is not necessarily mourning his death, but essentially pours some booze out. He comes back in true Romero zombie form, demands a cake, and what's his face dances like a jackass.
Ed Harris.
I almost said Ed O'Neill. I'm like, that's a very different Ed. That's not the
that
right
would be
Ed.
Interesting.
You know what? I wouldn't put it past him at this point. In 1982, possibility. But Ed Harris is just as interesting as, his dance in this, I guess, part of this movie, it rivals the Crispin Glover dance that we talked about maybe a month ago. Like it's up there as far as bad 80s horror movie dances.
Yeah, I would say Ed Harris is like the most recognizable person in this. And I don't know.
This whole movie or just this?
No, in this story. In this particular story. And he has those crazy eyes. So anytime he's on screen, he just has those like wide eyes and he's like, whoa. He's essentially so this woman comes, like you said, to visit her father's grave after she murdered him because he's an asshole. Where's my cake? And he berates her just to the cows come home.
Pretty much everyone in this entire film is a horrible person.
Yeah, very true. And yeah, she basically returns back to the house where he lived every Father's Day to celebrate his death. I'm not quite sure what the reason that she comes back to visit, but everybody knows that she's there and
make sure he's still dead.
Yeah. And well, this time he wasn't. And she comes to visit and everybody has a dinner. They have a dinner on Father's Day. And this time she comes to visit and she doesn't end up coming in the house after she's gone to visit the grave. So they go start to check on her. And that's when they find the dad there to collect his cake that he didn't get.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And him coming out of the ground is, I mean, this really, I feel like this part of this anthology film sets the tone for the whole movie because it is a horror movie, but it is very kind of cheesy in a lot of places.
It's pulpy. I mean, it's like the comic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like, you know, this speaks to 1982 in a lot of ways. It feels like they set out to make a horror movie that's for kids, but still would be entertaining to whoever likes.
Terrifying as shit, man.
Well, sure, but I think that what they were looking for is we're going to make a movie that appeals to kids, but also appeals to people who like Stephen King and George Romero movies and books. And I think for the most part, they kind of get it. You know, the zombie that comes out of the ground, this is, I mean, he looks, you could have said he's like a dirt pile as much as a zombie, and I probably would have believed you. Like, he's very grubby. Like, I think they didn't even put him in a coffin. They just threw some dirt on him and said good enough and moved on.
Well, he's dead.
Just dump him in the ground. The way he kills Ed Harris is pretty funny because Ed Harris goes out like a total bitch. Like, he's in this movie for all of like 2 minutes and gets his face smashed by this gigantic tombstone that I'm still not sure how this like dirt zombie was able to push. It doesn't seem logical, but it's memorable for what it is. But it really does set a tone because it's the kind of movie you're like, oh, that's creepy and that's effed up looking and all this stuff, but it never really feels like grim or terrifying at any point. Maybe if you're a kid.
I would say not this story for sure. This one doesn't. It's almost more laughable than anything else. Like the zombie is clearly a guy in a costume because the head.
Oh yeah,
like you can see
he's
the
bulky
mesh.
as shit.
Yeah, it's just like like a shell over someone essentially. So it looks like meshy, and I don't know. It's kind of funny, but it's got a little bit of all these stories kind of have this bit of humor, like sick black humor to them. There's always these little twists in all these stories, and this one's no different. You know, where's my cake? And which is a hilarious line that this old geezer's still looking for his cake, you know, after all these years, and that's all he wants. And they're you know, I think they're making him a cake. I think they're making a cake when they're in the
They're
kitchen.
making a cake, but not necessarily
Not
for him.
Right. But
Right.
he knows, he can smell it. It's the nose that knows.
It's the whole thing that brings him back. So moving on, after we get through, you know, the dad and his fucking cake, we move on to one of the more memorable parts of this. Probably the thing like that if you don't know this movie, this is probably the story that you see the most images, memes, clips, whatever of, because the star of this story and the only actor in this story, well, for the most part, is Stephen King. And this is the second story, which is the lonesome death of Jordy Verrill, whatever. So the only other person that's in this story is whoever plays like this university professor, and it's all in like dream sequences. But essentially what the second story is about is a meteor falls out of the sky and lands on Jordy's farm or property or something. Jordy, in true horror movie fashion that we love, immediately goes and touches the fucking thing and puts it in his mouth like a dipshit. Very much so like the stuff. The first thing they do when the stuff comes out of the ground is, this tastes good. Yeah. So it's right in that vein. After he touches the meteor and proclaims that meteor shit is all over him, which is pretty funny. He then gets this illusion in his head that he's going to go sell the meteor for no less than $200, which I guess is good or something like that.
And my favorite part is that he's going to the meteor department at the college.
Yeah.
Like they have their own department just for meteors.
Not astronomy or whatever. Meteors.
Yeah.
And through the course of the story, basically the first half of it is him just fantasizing about what he's going to do with this money and how he's going to sell this meteor, which looks like a bocce ball that happens to have like crud on it. And then we kind of realize that the meteor has infected him with some kind of plant shit. And he essentially starts growing mold and moss and becomes a plant over the course of, I guess, a day or two.
I think it's like overnight.
Yeah, something like that. Help me out here. What am I missing? Fill in some of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially it. He touches it and it's hot and he kind of burns his fingers and he pours water on it, which cracks it open. And all this green goo,
meteor shit.
liquid, meteor shit starts pouring out of it. And his finger, everything he's touched with those fingers. He keeps sucking on his fingers, and he notices he starts getting blisters on his fingers, and that just turns into more green. As the story progresses, a lot of it's told through like television, a news broadcast or something, and by the end, he's basically like you said, turned into a plant. And I think on the TV channel or whatever, he's got playing in the background there, mentioning how this town where this is gonna have an exceptional like green growth or something.
Yeah,
rain and a lot of
it's green. A rain season. Yeah, I do think there's things that are funny about the performance that Stephen King gives, because one, he's not an actor. We know that, but from everything I've read, there was a lot of cocaine involved with this particular scene. Yeah, Stephen King. I guess the direction he was given was to act like Wile E. Coyote, which I think is pretty great because he kind of does. And there's a scene where to fix the problem, he just goes and like pounds essentially a bottle of vodka that he just pours into like a Kool-Aid pitcher of orange juice or orange drink or whatever. And turns out that wasn't water in the bottle. He literally just pounded a whole bottle of vodka because realism, I guess.
Sure. Commitment to the craft.
I think this is, we haven't mentioned his name yet, but this is a movie that Tom Savini worked on the effects for it. And I think the effects with the hair growing on him, how it progressed, or not hair, but the weeds or the mold, whatever it is that's growing, his affliction as it gets progressively worse. They do a really, really good job with the effects in this. It looks really cool and it holds up pretty well. Yes, his acting is incredibly slapsticky and stupid, but the visuals for this particular episode or clip or whatever, this part of the story, I think it looks really cool. It's something really different, and I can't really think of too many other places where I've seen someone turn into a plant and have it look cool.
He almost looks like he becomes like a Sasquatch or something, but just covered in moss.
That's what I thought of.
And this story is clearly the funniest story of all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like laugh out loud kind of stuff.
Yeah. And this is the one that, I mean, up until the very last scene of it, basically, you could almost show a kid and it could be kind of funny. Like, maybe you don't want to have your kid watch a guy guzzle a whole bottle of vodka, but, well, and that's why I was going to say, until the last scene, you're not in too bad a shape.
Just cut it. Oh, what happened to him? How he just turned into a plant.
Yeah, he's a plant. Problem solved. Anything you want to mention with that before we move on to what's one of the more jarring parts of this movie?
No, I'd like to move on because this one kind of holds a little bit of a soft spot for me, I guess, if you could call it that.
So I'm going to let you take the lead on this one because I know this story and I think you'll tell it better than I did. So, Sean, tell us about Something to Tide You Over.
Yeah, so story 3 is just called Something to Tide You Over, and this has arguably the biggest stars of the movie. So this is all these stories, save maybe The Crate, which is the next one, have small casts. Like the first one is just a handful of people, 4 or 5 different people. We've got story 2, which is The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill. That's just one person, as you mentioned before. It's Stephen King and the professor, of course. But Something to Tide You Over is Ted Danson. It's got Leslie Nielsen, and it's got Galen Ross, who was in Dawn of the Dead, if you don't instantly recognize the name. But this story is basically about the lover of an adulterous woman, the lover is Ted Danson. The adulterous woman is Galen Ross, if you couldn't guess. He's confronted by Leslie Nielsen, and he, at gunpoint, takes Ted Danson out to the beach and on his own private property on this beach. And he says, hey, I'll take you to see your girlfriend or my wife. And as he takes him out there, he introduces him to a hole in the beach, and he says, get in, because I'm going to bury you up to your neck, just like I do for her. And he has a camera fixed on her wherever she is. She's in a undisclosed location on the beach. And as the tide comes in, he's like, I hope you can hold your breath. And there's obviously a lot more going in here. And it's kind of torturous in a way because Nielsen's just kind of fucking with him. And he's like, yeah, hey, sorry, you're going to be dead. And I won't even care. No one will ever hear you. You can scream all you want. They'll make more.
I feel like Leslie Nielsen is flat out menacing in this.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Role. And granted, I know this is like 10 years before any of these movies, maybe 15 years, but whenever I see Leslie Nielsen, I always think of the boob that's in the movies, like
Frank Drebin
all that type of shit.
Yeah.
So seeing him flat out like murder a person sadistically, I'm like, oh yeah, that's fucking weird.
Yeah, he had a whole career as a heavy, or as not a heavy,
right,
but as the straight man. And then I think that's what made all these Naked Guns and all those other goofy movies hit more heavily because, he's finally doing this comedic turn. But eventually the tide comes in and it drowns Danson and Galen Ross. And Nielsen's just hanging out in his apartment or his beach house, and he's watching the closed circuit TVs to see. He's just kind of
Head
reveling
to toe
in it.
in velour.
Yeah. He's in a nice jumpsuit, laying in his bed, goes to take a shower, and unbeknownst to him, Ted Danson and Galen Ross show up as these kind of waterlogged sea zombies, but they show up as a mist, which is really cool. They kind of come in as a mist, and Nielsen tries to plug them a couple times with a gun, shoots him in the head, and every time like the seawater will kind of pour out of him. And essentially he tries to get away and he doesn't. And the end of the story is like a comic panel of him like screaming no or whatever, and they're accosting him.
I think my favorite panel from that is when it's him and it just says cringe in big letters across the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, this story for me holds a special place, and I think I've mentioned it in episodes. I know John knows about this, but it has sentimentality for me because it really fucked me up as a kid. I remember going to my aunt and uncle's house, and my cousin was I was probably 7, and she had to have been 3. And this is just playing in the background, and they're all watching it. And we came over to visit to drop something off or whatever. And I remember seeing the scene of him being drowned, where there's a scene where Ted Danson's just underwater and his hair is all floating up because he's totally underwater. And the zombies come and they get shot. And it ruined me for a very long time seeing these kind of zombie creatures, and really screwed me up for a long time.
I mean, that's understandable. I mean, this one,
it's probably the darkest turn. Other than maybe the next one might be a little bit darker, but they're very neck and neck.
I think this one's darker because this one, up until the zombies show up, feels way more realistic and sadistic at the same time. Like everything in this movie before this and arguably after this is real, like, campy comic book shit. For the most part.
Yeah.
And I guess you could say this one gets to that because you have sea zombie things that come up. And I mean, again, realistically, they don't do a whole lot other than just kind of like chase them down and like, put the word cringe on them.
Do something to them.
Yeah. So you don't really see them like, eat his brains or whatever these particular zombies do. But the idea of burying Ted Danson,
I think Harry and Becky. Harry's Ted Danson and Becky is Galen Ross.
Right. Well, I'm going to call him Sam for
that works.
The obvious reason. And this is before Cheers, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think
probably.
This is before he was on Cheers. So.
Yeah, 82.
But anyway, him burying, Ted Danson, or making himself bury him for the most part, him running this like endless cord of cable and power, God knows where the fuck that like started, that he just ran it to this part of the beach so that he can not only watch Ted Danson die, but Ted Danson can watch his mistress or whatever die. It's fucked. That's a fucked thought process to have in the first place. And then granted, they kind of bring it back to the whole like campiness with the sea zombies after that. And I think the biggest like drawback with this is that it's the second zombie movie or the second zombie story in a 5-story anthology. But I also think it's the better zombie story of the two of them by far.
Yeah. And I think it does benefit from being this really short story. If this was like they tried to make these longer stories, especially this one, I don't think it would have held up or packed as much of a punch. So it's having that little short contained thing really kind of adds to it. But yeah, this was the one that, like I said, watching this screwed me up for a long time. So thanks, Aunt Karen and Uncle Keith. I appreciate that.
I also wonder how much of this is either lost or enhanced by the opinion that we have of some of these actors now compared to what they were in 82. Because most of these people in 82 would have either just been started in their career. They weren't established like they were now. Like Ed Harris wasn't the guy in The Rock in 1982. Ted Danson, I don't think, was Sam the bartender yet.
I looked it up. It was the same year.
And Leslie Nielsen wasn't the lovable boob. But for Cheers? Or
yeah.
Okay. So within months, he might or might not have been Sam yet, depending on whenever this came out and when that show started. All these people, you didn't really have like, I mean, I guess maybe you have an opinion of Galen Ross, but for the most part, a lot of these, you're almost watching it now, getting a whole different opinion on these characters just because, especially Leslie Nielsen, like it's really hard for me to see him being sinister now after so many years of knowing him as this like He's just the old man with white hair who acts silly and is probably dead now.
He's definitely dead.
Is he dead? I don't know. I assumed. So he's had white hair for as long. I don't think I've ever seen him without that white hair. So
I would argue that some of the next two stories have actors that are a little bit more recognizable, like higher end actors, maybe. Like this starts that. But yeah, I would agree that some of these, knowing who they are now, it kind of is like, oh, it's pretty cool that these people were in this movie in the first place at all.
So with that in mind, we're going to move on to The Crate, which is the next story. And this one does have a known person, but The Crate is essentially, it starts with the story of the janitor finding a crate that is mysteriously labeled from the Arctic and has like 18 whatever stenciled on the side of it. This is kind of intertwined with, I don't remember the guy who plays him, but this dude who has gone along and married John Carpenter's wife, Adrienne Barbeau at the time. And she's about as cunty as a cunt can be in this like movie. Like she is a real dickhead of a wife.
She's pretty shitty
for the, part that she's in here with it. And maybe this is wrong on my part, but like you basically see him start having these like fantasies of just flat out like killing his wife. And the first one you see, they're in some like party outside, or like
it's like a faculty party because they're at a college.
Yeah, there are a lot of people in this, but I feel like this is really a small, like the cast is still small. Like there's maybe 4 people in this as opposed to, but there's others that are around. What's funny about it to me, like when he blows her brains out, like he pinpoints her like right between the eyes, like perfect shot as she's like bitching at him about something. And this whole crowd just starts clapping. Every time I see that, I forget that it's coming. And every time he hits her in the head with that, I start laughing my ass off every time. Because then I remember like, oh, he just dreamed this. But it's just like,
they don't present it that way. The way it's just in line with everything. And you're like,
it's such a mood change.
He pulls out this big, dirty, hairy, like 357. It's Hal Holbrook is the character.
Yes. So eventually this wraps back around. We find out that, the janitor is getting this other professor or some shit to come check out the crate. They open it up and there is a big fucking monster in the crate with little fucking legs or something like that. Short version of it is, one dude's traumatized, one dude's eaten. I think he eats another like random student that's walking by too or something like that. And he runs back to Hal Holbrook and he basically sees this as an opportunity to kill his wife, goes back, cleans up all the mess, kind of contains the monster, I guess, for the moment, but only long enough to get to the point where he can feed his wife to the monster and hilarity ensues.
Yeah, he tricks her into checking out this dark corner under the stairs or whatever. And she's like, there's nothing down here. You're so stupid. I mean, the entire time Adrienne Barbeau is on screen with Hal Holbrook, it is to berate him and tell him how much of a shit he is and how much of a worthless
to make you not feel
turd.
bad that he's going to kill her ass.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely don't feel bad for him that she's going to die. But I like like you mentioned, these fantasies he has about killing his wife. I found those to be just hilarious. That entire thing.
Which maybe that says more about us than anything else.
Yeah, maybe.
But
yeah, I think it's supposed to be played for laughs. I mean, come on.
Yeah. This is also notable because this is the first time that Tom Savini was able to make a big animatronic monster for a movie. And I think he nails it. I think it looks really cool. It moves really naturally for it. Like it's not the kind of monster that moves that looks like it's all robotic. It's a fictional character, so I guess you can make it move however you want, but it looks like it's moving the way that you would expect it to. Has a lot of teeth, and its stage name is Fluffy, so he's pretty great. He's the other thing that if you don't see Stephen King and like all his shit from this, Fluffy's probably the other thing that you would recognize from this movie because that pops up quite a bit.
I have to mention, I am not a fan of Fluffy. I don't particularly like the design of the monster. Not really. I find it kind of like, I don't know, something very punchable about it. I think it's like supposed to be the size of a baboon or something.
I always thought it had more of like a Sasquatch like top with like a short leg bottom.
You never really see how tall it is though.
No, you kind of do when it's it's
pushing the crate
under the stairs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's pushing the crate, but there's a spot where it's under the stairs and it kind of scampers around a little bit when it grabs the rando. I mean, you don't fully see, but kind of see. Whatever. I like Fluffy. So I find him to be entertaining. I'd keep him around as a pet in a cage.
And I feel like this is one where, well, that's not true. I was going to say, I feel like this story is one where it's kind of up in the air as to what actually happens, because at the end, Hal Holbrook launches the crate that Fluffy is in, into a quarry and it goes underwater, and they basically show that it escapes. but you don't know quite what happens. But I was going to say, you can make your conclusions that Leslie Nielsen gets killed in the third story. You can say that in the second story, well, Stephen King definitely dies. And in the first story, Ed Harris definitely dies. And, all those people die. So I feel like this is the first one where maybe it's really kind of definitive because they show him escape. They show Fluffy escape from the crate while it's underwater, but they imply that it's going to be coming after the two professors that are left as they play chess. I feel, at least that's what I kind of took from it.
Doesn't Fluffy come back in the some of the sequels? Or
I don't know. It's been a long time. That's another episode, John.
Okay. Well, we won't worry. If I'm wrong, feel free to tell me, but I feel like he comes back either on the TV show or one of the sequels that they did, but doesn't matter. We're not talking about those right now. Which leads us to the next story, which is also kind of the last story, which is They're Creeping Up on You, which is basically a story about a dickhead who gets eaten by cockroaches, essentially. Like, that's easy. He's Howie Mandel, pre-Howie Mandel.
Pre-warts.
Trapped in a pristine white room, which I guess the only reason they did that is so they could find the bugs. And basically, he's just a berating asshole for 15 minutes who eventually dies at the hand of what he hates most, I guess.
Yeah, and he's a rich asshole that is doing corporate takeovers, and somebody that he's trying to take over their business ends up killing themselves, and the person's wife calls him, and he's really very indifferent about the whole thing. And the thing that I liked about the story initially, I remember watching this movie initially and thinking like, oh, this is just kind of a throwaway. But now watching it this time, you kind of realize it's more of a psychological horror because the entire time, we should mention this is E.G. Marshall, who is if you ever watched this movie in high school, 12 Angry Men, about the jury, and he's probably the angry man, the angriest of the angry men. And he's the father-in-law, Clark Griswold's father-in-law in Christmas Vacation. But it's a psychological horror because you start to kind of feel like he's the only one seeing the bugs. He's like obsessed with this. And other people are like, yeah, okay, whatever. I forgot what his name is. Something Pratt, Upton Pratt. Like, all right, Mr. Pratt, sure, Mr. Pratt, we'll send the people, Mr. Pratt. And at the end, it's really gross. He just basically dies and there's no roaches there, but roaches start to actually burst from his skin. And it's one of the more gruesome, like disturbing, I think, effects of the entire movie is to have this guy just burst into all these roaches out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can almost see like the exact frame where it stops looking good at the same time. Like there's the first like couple that come up because they start by coming out of his mouth and then it gets worse.
Yeah.
The first couple that come out of him, like it might still be him that's spitting out these cockroaches. Like it looks really good for the first couple and it can very quickly just like, okay, that's a very obvious dummy that they're just tearing apart. And I mean, what are you going to do? It's, 1982. You got to make the best with what you have, but
they should have embedded roaches under his skin and had him burst out.
I know. What a fucking pussy. It still is a very creepy. It is by far my least favorite of these stories because it's just like, you just leave it like, ugh. Like, it's not so much that it's scary or that it's
just gross.
Anything like that. It's just, you leave it like, I don't like that. I don't really have a lot to say on that one, though, other than
So I wanted to bring this up. So the first story, Father's Day, happens to be this woman who kills her father, and she hits him in the head with an ashtray. And that ashtray shows up in the different stories. So I didn't see it in the second story.
I didn't notice it either, but there's so much shit in Stephen King's, like, Hubble.
Yeah, maybe it could just be in the background. In the third story, Leslie Nielsen has it as like a soap dish or something in his bathroom. The fourth story, the professor.
Doesn't he like pick it up and inspect it? Or
I don't know.
Am I confusing him? I know Ed Harris does at one point. He picks it up and is like all in it and stuff.
I think it shows up as a soap dish in a lot of the scenes or a lot of the other stories, but I didn't notice in the second one. But like you said, Stephen King's apartment or his house is so cluttered in that story that you're like, you wouldn't be able to find it anyways.
And this one, you should be able to find it, but it's also not really the type of thing you're looking for in this. Like they do, because everything's so like pristine and white in this, like whatever they're focusing on, whether it's a cockroach or his can of bug spray or him just being an all around prick, it just sticks out so much.
It's a dark marble ashtray as compared to like all the white in his entire place.
Yeah. And this kind of wraps back around to the prologue epilogue story, which goes back to the man Tom Atkins. And we're now on the next morning, and he's basically sitting there eating breakfast and complaining about his neck hurting. And we, in short order, find out that after Tom Savini and other guy pick his comic book out of the trash, and you realize, oh, someone's already sent away for the voodoo doll. Whatever. And it cuts back up to, Stephen King's kid's room where he has a voodoo doll.
Joe Hill, a.k.a. Joe King.
Joe Hill. What's his name? Joe whatever
Hill.
His name is.
Yeah.
He's got a voodoo doll, and he's got like the longest push pin in existence. Like he must have sent away to like Push Pins R Us to get the biggest one he could find. And he is just murdering the fuck out of his father from afar. So it's basically what happens.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's a very Cliff Notes version of Creepshow. I don't know if we can talk about this at length without it being a 3-hour episode. I think we already know where these are going to fall, but what's your favorite story out of this one?
I mean, for me, I don't know how it should be fairly obvious. The third story, Something That Tied You Over, is definitely my favorite of the bunch. And it's, like I said, there's so much just mental sentimentality wrapped up to it in it for me. And watching it like as a kid terrified the shit out of me. Watching it as an adult is, I think, terrifying in a different way. You don't realize that, yeah, that'd be pretty fucked up to bury someone up to their neck and just have the tide come in and fucking drown them. And I would say a very close second is The Crate, where the professor and Fluffy. And I think that one is more because of the kind of how sadistic it is and how like the fantasy, how funny the fantasy was. I would say after that, it's going to be the Stephen King story, the lonesome death of Jordy Verrill. And then the other two, I could kind of, they're creeping up on you. It's probably a fourth. And I think Father's Day I'm not even going to count the bookend story. I think Father's Day is probably the weakest link of this entire movie.
I would agree with you, except I would flip The Crate and The Tide because I really like the effects work in The Crate. And I feel like that's as much of a reason to see this as anything else is the effects work. Like I said, I like the design of Fluffy. I know you said you didn't, but I dug it. And I kind of have more fun with the story of The Crate than I do of, The Tides Come In or whatever it's called. Something to tide you over. I'm sorry.
How dare you?
I know. I'm a terrible human being. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've kind of went through these at rapid pace. Do you have anything you want to hit on before we start kind of moving on to, because we have a lot of responses to our question of the week. So do you have anything you want to hit on before we get into wrapping up on this one?
Yeah, I don't really. I mean, I think I've pretty much said everything that I wanted to say. And like I said, that third story just held so much over me forever. But yeah, that's really all I had to add. So, yeah, still does. It's still kind of fucked up.
Oh, what time is it then, Sean?
Then you're in for a big treat, bro, because it's hot dog time.
You want to lead us off with this?
Yeah, I can start off. I'm generally not a fan of anthology movies, be it like horror movies or Christmas movie, whatever it is. I'd rather just see a full movie about a thing rather than like little vignettes about each thing. But I feel like Creepshow is the one that got it right. There's a good mix of that psychological horror. There's humor for sure. I think that's kind of a trademark of a lot of what Stephen King does. And people who are into gory, kind of disturbing horror at the same time have something here. I think the movie starts off kind of weak, but it hits its peak in that third story. It ends up higher than it started. I feel like that last story is better than the first one. Like I said, I feel like the first one's the weakest link. I haven't seen this movie in a long time, but I still found it just as disturbing as ever. I'm going to give Creepshow 7 Knights in Shining Corduroy out of 11 hot dogs.
This would be a hard one to top. Knights in Shining Corduroy.
That's what he calls Ted Danson.
I know.
Whose hot dog is this, huh? Is it yours?
So for me, as far as anthology series like stuff goes, I could kind of take it or leave it. I prefer it in TV show form as opposed to film form generally, but I think Creepshow does it pretty well. And if any movie was to be the example of how to do it, not just to kind of make it feel like you're watching a comic book, but to do short vignette stories. And I mean, yes, some of these stories are stronger than others, but all of them have about roughly a 15-minute runtime, and they all have a beginning, middle, and an end. And I don't feel like there's any massive like story plot holes in any of them. Like I don't feel like I wasn't told a complete story with them. So I feel like he gets it right as far as all that goes. This has that like campy 80s look, which can be pretty fun. I think this does it well. The cast in this, if nothing else, this is worth watching just to see some of these people that turned into megastars and where they started, because this is a lot of them being younger and dumber before they really hit that craft. For me, this one, I mean, it's been probably a year or two since I've seen. I think I've watched it since we started doing this show, but only like once since then. And I think it's because when we started, this movie came up a lot, and then we just haven't talked about it until now. This one's a solid movie for me. I'd say I'm right there with you. This is a solid like 7, like buried up to the last bite hot dogs out of 10. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of cheese, and it's kind of, if you want to change a pace for a horror movie, if you're doing like a horror movie marathon, or if you're in the middle of a Horrorween marathon, you just want something that's a different feel than a slasher or a zombie movie or whatever. You get a little bit of everything with this, and it's a good, this is a really good palate cleanser if you're in the middle of any number of, if you're just in a rut, because it doesn't linger on anything too long for you to get bored with it. And it does, for the most part, a really good job with everything it's trying to convey. And the effects look great in it, as you would expect. So yeah, I feel like 7 out of 10 is fair. It's not the kind of thing I want to watch every year, but I go back to it every few years. So,
and I feel like when I sat and watched this, it's 2 hours. It's a 2-hour runtime, and I watched the stories, and some of them are they feel like they blow by so quickly, and others feel a little bit longer. And I wonder, I haven't seen it anywhere, what the runtimes are for each one of these stories. And I always think, how did this equal out to 2 hours? It just seems like it really goes by quickly.
Like I said about 15 minutes each is a very rough estimate.
Oh, I know. And that's not even close. I mean, if you think about it, it's like an hour and 15 minutes if we added all the stories, maybe another 15 minutes for the bookends. And it's still like, where is all that time? I think that 4th story must be one of the longer ones.
I feel like the cockroach one goes on quite a while.
It does start to kind of wear out its welcome, but it's cranking up that psychological.
He's such a hateable character too,
for sure.
Especially when he starts being kind of racist and kind of shitty about suicide and stuff. It's like, dude, just kill this guy already. Let's move on.
If you don't do it, I will.
All right. So maybe that's why, but for the most part, like I said, I didn't realize this was a 2-hour movie till you just said it. And I've seen this I don't know how many times. So if you can, I'm the this chapter's president of this movie's too fucking long fan club. So if I'm not feeling that's probably doing something right. Moving right along, we're on the question of the week segment of this show, and we went with the Stephen King theme for the question of the week because I wasn't feeling that creative. So the question of the week is pretty simple. It is, what is your favorite Stephen King story? I did not specify as to if this was a book, movie, TV show, whatever. I know Stephen King's done way more shit in his life than I will ever do from a creative standpoint. I mean, I don't know. He's all over the place. So floodgates are open with this one. We'll start over on Facebook, and friend of the show, Jason, says, this one's tough. I can only base my picks on books of his. I've actually read Misery Stands Out as one of the most impactful. While the story isn't as intricate as some other offerings, it was brutal and invoked more emotion and fear than I expected. That one translated to film more accurately as well, albeit a bit different. So our friend Evan, also over on Facebook, said pretty much any of the short stories from Night Shift to Skeleton Crew are worth reading. I've read The Stand probably 4 times though, so I've got to go with that. So over on Instagram, Horror Geek Mel said The Man in the Black Suit. At Hasluke said book, Pet Cemetery, short story The Jaunt. And then our friend Old Nerdy Bastard, who is one of the crusty boys from You Gonna Eat That Crust, also members of the You Run Podcast Network, said The Stand, followed by It. I do not know if he's referring to the movies or the books. I'm going to assume the books, but tell me I'm wrong. And then...
You're wrong.
Thank you. Lumberjay Reviews, who is a one half of the Girl in the Gay podcast, says Carrie. And I know they just did an episode on Carrie the movie recently, which focused on the original and the remake. I don't remember if they got into the book that much, but go check that out. It is also available at yourunpodcast.com. Another great show over there.
If you don't check them out, they're all going to laugh at you.
That's right. And they might even fart in your general direction. That happens. Speaking of You Run Podcast Network members, Boomer over at Podcast in the Woods says, I've read one Stephen King book. So I liked it. But why read the book when you can just watch the fucking movie? Man after my own heart. Books are hard. Lots of words. Our friends over at Dissect That Film said, to be honest, I've not read a lot of his books. The ones I have read are all the way through were The Green Mile, The Shining, and Dreamcatcher. The Shining would probably be my favorite of the 3. This guy at You Run Podcasts, I believe he's a member of the You Run Podcast Network,
What is that?
I know. Scott says, Carrie and The Shining are the best in my opinion. Also, You Run Podcast Network members. There's a lot of them that replied to this, and there's some that are not members as well, but we're just in a track of them at the moment. The Sinister Scoop says, The Stand has always been my favorite. Desperation is a close second, though. It was the first King book that I read at 8 years old. Newman over movies for days. Another You Run Podcast Network member says, I really like the 10 o'clock people from Nightmares and Dreamscapes, not dream skates. That would be weird. Skating around in your dreams like Freddy Krueger and a hockey team. At the Liminal Lands says, the jaunt is short and harrowing. Survivor Type is a masterclass in body horror and does an amazing job drawing you in. But for me, nothing holds a candle to The Long Walk. It's the most real thing I've ever read. And that's just short stories. Ask me about the novels. You could have, I just asked for stories or whatever. So, as Super Slash Pod says, book is definitely The Shining. Movie is absolutely Maximum Overdrive. I'm kind of disappointed that it took this long to bring up Maximum Overdrive, but here we are. At Force 5 Pod says, Needful Things, although the jaunt is haunting. At Eric Malcolm says, my favorite book has always been It, the only book that has ever gave me nightmares. And then last, at Sexy Horror Fan 87 says, Insomnia. That was a lot. We haven't had a good bunch of responses like that in a while. So thank you for everyone who took the time to respond to this silly question. Sean, it's your turn. You're on the stand now. What is your favorite Stephen King story?
Shawshank Redemption.
Straight to the point.
I like Misery a lot too, but I only watched the movie. Not much of a reader.
Yeah, I've only read The Shining of his books. And it kind of convinced me not to read any more of his books because I was like, ugh, this is like homework. My favorite Stephen King story is Pet Sematary, not because of the story, but because I love the Ramones song. And they shot a video that was based off the movie. And without the movie and presumably the book, there'd be no Pet Sematary song. So that's my answer.
I thought because of your undying love for Edward Furlong.
Is he in that movie?
Pretty sure he is. Oh, he's in Pet Sematary 2. Damn it. Sorry.
So, anything else we want to talk about? Edward Furlong. We can go about the Crow movie he was in, or we could talk about his version. He was in the Night of the Demons remake.
Oh,
I do know a little bit about Edward Furlong. So.
No, I'm good.
All right. So, since Sean doesn't want to continue this conversation about Edward Furlong, we'll say to be continued until next week, where we might or might not be talking about something with Edward Furlong in it. We really should feature a movie of his on this show. That seems like something we would do. So to find out when we do that, you can follow us. We're at Dewey Pod Monster on all the social networks. That's also where we post the question of the week. Or more importantly, you can go check out our site. It is crap.town. That's where all of our previous and new episodes are and will always be. You can also send us messages there and tell me how stupid I am for having knowledge of anything that Edward Furlong did after Terminator 2. And of course, you can find all of our previous episodes and current episodes and all of the other great shows on the You Run Podcast Network at yourunpodcast.com. Sean, what else? What am I forgetting? Tell me some other stuff.
If you want your answer to the question of the week read on this show, you can follow us on all social medias at Dewey Pod Monster. Everything we talk about in the show is in the show notes. So if you click on any of those and their affiliate links, we get a couple bucks when you spend $1 million or $2 million. If you want to follow my Michigan Craft Beer Adventures, you can find me at youtube.drafttherapy.com or follow me on all the social medias at Draft Therapy.
That's right. Do all that. Anyway, we only have 2 episodes left of Horrorween, so we're going to go watch those movies and talk about them and stuff. So come back next week for more, and then we'll never talk about horror movies again after the month of October. It's the only month that we will ever talk about. That's not true. We'll see you next week. Cheers.
Blah, blah, blah.